Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to another episode of Case by Case. I'm your host Waleed Mir. Today we have a very good friend of mine with me, Afzal Khan, who also happens to be an expert of international law, who has studied international law, teaches international law, speaks and writes about international law, and you also happen to have a Russian descent. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Thank you for that introduction, Waleed. I think you've never been this nice to me before.
I think you deserve it.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Yeah, it is true. I did my I did my LLM from in international law from University of Glasgow.
Glasgow, how was that?
It was a nice experience. Like my main professor who taught me international law was Professor Tams. The thing about studying in the UK and being blessed with the opportunity to study in University of Glasgow and universities such as like Berkeley that you studied from is the fact that the professors are so passionate about what they teach. Like for instance, Professor Tams, he has lectures on the audiovisual library on the UN's website. He has represented so many states, and he had so much portfolio in the International Court of Justice as well. So he works in this field as well. So he taught us that field as well, and the passion, the amount of the meticulousness that they approach each and everything over there. It was like I think I was really blessed to be a part of that.
Do you listen to Western media?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, of course. I think how can you not? It's so it's so saturated out there online right now.
Do you like the opinions that the Western media portrays about Russia? I'm asking this because you studied international law and you have a Russian descent. You're a patriotic Russian.
I'm a patriotic Pakistani as well.
Of course, but Russian as well. So have you ever faced that internal conflict about, Western media tells you about, okay, not all the time maybe, but they do tell you about.
I think it's all
They're
the time.
very loud about it, that about the Russians committing violations of international law. You being, a student of international law and then being a Russian. Have you ever faced that internal conflict, or Western media is bluffing? Is that the case?
I wouldn't say it's... So I would go as far to say that thank you so much for bringing me on this podcast and letting me to exercise my freedom of speech to speak on this topic, because as you know, most of Russian outlets have been banned completely. So it's everything that you're getting about what's going on in Russia and the Ukraine conflict, it's all manufactured in the West. So I think you have been a bigger proponent in that regard of the freedom of speech. More so than the West, so I commend you on that.
Oh wow!
But the thing is, yes, I do feel that. I do feel that the media is really, really biased about how they're portraying the Russian and Ukraine conflict. They've been biased for a long time. Have you seen their movies? Have you seen their films? Have you seen The Punisher? The Punisher has this big baddie in it, where this hulking guy who's 7 feet tall, and he's only called the Russian. So.
Why? Because he beats people up?
He beats people up, or they're portrayed as cold-blooded killers.
That's the propaganda.
That is, no? I feel like that's propaganda. So America has always had this on their agenda.
Do you think Russia has been failing towards countering that propaganda?
I believe so, because Russia has been a very sheltered country for a very long time. A few of my friends have visited Russia, and they were like in awe of the beautiful culture that is on display in every street of any city that you go to in Russia. So Russia has not really promoted itself on the international arena that much, besides their involvement in the Second World War and the First World War. And
then does that give you a ground to complain about Western media while, when Russia अपने आप को आगे नहीं लेके आ रहा, promote नहीं कर रहा, and the Russian people keep on saying that Russia is misunderstood, but on the other hand, when you look at Western media, they're propagating their opinions, and then you come and say कि वो गलत बात कर रहे हैं, but आप सही बात बता दो, आप भी तो नहीं बता रहे क्या सही बात है.
कैसे
I mean,
बताए?
this is in the context of, Russia's involvement in Syria, Russia's involvement in Ukraine. I mean, these modern day issues आजकल तो यही चल रहे हैं ना. तो in this context, मैं आपसे ये डिस्कस कर रहा हूँ कि अपना पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू रशिया क्यों नहीं बता पा रहा. इज इट द लैंग्वेज बैरियर? व्हाट इज इट?
I think it's the language.
Because they do have money. They have a lot of money. They can use it for this purpose.
True. I think it's the language barrier a little bit, because even I know I speak the language, right? I speak Russian as well. My mom, by the way, is Russian, and my dad is Pakistani. He's a Pathan. So I'm a mixed race individual. So my mom, whenever I was inside the confines of my house, I used to consume Russian culture mostly. Mothers usually, like, men are breadwinners. They go out.
Yeah. You spend most of your time.
Exactly.
With your mother.
So my mom like brought a lot of literature from Russia as well. Like when we moved to Pakistan, I've consumed Russian literature. I've watched all those, the West might call communist propaganda cartoons, but they were such sweet cartoons, like promoting traditional gender roles. I don't know why in the modern age we're shy away from discussing traditional gender roles and celebrating them, as if the traditional gender roles have now become redundant and that's oppression in a way. I don't buy that. I think there's room for all types of gender based roles in our society today, and more so for the traditional gender roles, because I've been, I think, raised in a family which very much abided by those traditional gender roles. So when I used to come out of my house, I used to consume Pakhtun culture, like in Peshawar when we used to live there. And then in 2012 we moved to Islamabad. But there was always a disconnect, even internally in Pakistan, where people would have these weird, like outlandish opinions about what Russia is all about. Like literally in school, I fought with some kid, literally on the playground. He called me out on it. I once said that it was a factual statement, man. I said Russia is the biggest country in the world. He's like, no, Pakistan is the biggest country in the world. I was like, what? I was like, okay. And then he called me out on it. He was like, let's go out and settle this in the playground. The rest is history. I don't want to speak on what happened to him, but we did fight.
But
so
yeah,
like
also,
people would ask me questions like this, like, do you eat cactus or something? Why would I eat cactus, man? We're not made of steel or something. Okay, we'll consume cactus and be okay with it. Like, there are needles.
That is actually an example of, how misunderstood Russia has been.
So just in Pakistan, imagine this. Like in Pakistan, people don't perceive Russia the way. I feel like right now with the Israel and Palestine conflict, I think a lot of hypocrisies have been exposed of the Western media, But I still believe that the Israel and Palestine conflict still was able to garner more balanced coverage in the media. I don't see that happening over Russia and Ukraine.
The media coverage about Israeli and Palestinian conflict is like
balanced? I mean, I think it's more tilted towards towards Israel, but I feel like still, like, there are people who are outspoken. I think the Muslim population in the world, they're a force to be reckoned with. So
what I observed when Western media portrays Israeli and Palestinian conflict, and when they portray Russian Russo-Ukrainian conflict, if you're talking about Russian Ukrainian conflict, whoever sides with Russia gets cancelled by Western media. And
I believe so.
In this Israeli-Palestinian conflict, whoever sides with Palestine gets cancelled. I think that's a commonality.
I don't think so. I don't see.
But
I think these are different, very
both
different
of them,
conflicts.
Both of these countries, or both of these states, they have different roles. They have different positions. One is considered or portrayed of being an oppressor, and the other is being oppressed. And then at the same time, like, that's such a messed up approach.
Exactly.
Of the Western media.
So I'll give you an example of a friend of mine. He works in New York. He passed his New York bar exam, and he works there. And he has a lot of what we call Gora friends, like local Americans, like different mix of friends from the West. So what he did was, which I really like commend him on this and applaud, it took a lot of courage to do that. He literally called out every single person on his social media. He tagged them in a post and he called them out on the fact that so for instance, when the Palestine-Israel conflict erupted and spiked again recently, he was very much like, I think we were all passionate and compassionate actually, like about the plight of Palestinians and them being bombarded, children dying, those videos, you've probably seen those videos.
I have seen them.
So I think he was moved by that, and he called out all his friends in his circle, the ones who, at the time when the Ukraine and Russian conflict erupted, they were black and white about it. They were like, Russia is the aggressor, Russia has done this, has done that.
But no, tell me this. Like,
And Palestine,
I've seen the
when
videos.
Israel and Palestine conflict erupted, everyone was like, okay, I think it's a gray area. I don't know. I mean, I'm very conflicted who to side with. It's clear as day.
Double
One person
standards.
throws a pebble and you take a bazooka and shoot it straight in
But
their face.
you know,
Where's the proportionality?
Like, I've seen the videos of children dying in Palestine,
Yeah.
but I've also seen the videos of people dying in Ukraine at the hands of Russian soldiers. Or do you deny that? Because there are videos.
I don't deny the devastations that
Do
have
you
been
think
caused.
Russia has been committing international law violations
I think
in Ukraine and in Syria?
I think as much as possible, Russia has been one of the only countries in the world who have tried their best to conform to international law. I'll give you an example. Like Russia's policy, for instance, let's go to Syria for a bit. We as Muslims, like especially Sunni Muslims, there's a divide between Shia and Sunni. We don't like Bashar al-Assad. Why? Because he's Shia.
That's true.
We don't like him just because of that. And because he is a dictator. He is a dictator for sure. But this thing about regime change, which is the Western policy, the American policy, they've done that in Iraq, Iran, Sham, Libya, Afghanistan. They've done it all over the planet. And that has not worked. They've left countries in shambles. They've left countries devoid of resources. They've exploited the resources and then they left. What happened in Afghanistan recently?
But do you think that gives Russia the right to police them?
No. Russia's policy, I'm going to explain it to you. Russia's policy is not to do regime change. Their goal is to maintain the de jure government intact. Because by now, if Russia has always involved itself in international relations or in different international conflicts through either authorization from the head of state of the country requesting that assistance or through the consent of that state. Syria, literally, Bashar al-Assad reached out to Putin. He reached out to them, and that's why they came in and they started to secure the government settlements, buildings, and that's what pushed ISIS away, which was at one point they were the boogeyman of the world. They were committing atrocities. They did that Paris attack in 2015, I believe. So that all of that has been subverted. You don't hear about ISIS nowadays too much, don't you?
We don't.
That's because Russia got involved. Russia's policy is to maintain the regime that is in place. And then once things subside, because ISIS is a bigger threat, once that subsides, then we can talk about a democratic way of changing governance.
It wasn't the case in Ukraine.
It wasn't the case. So
Zelensky himself stepped into the war zone wearing that, suit and bulletproof jacket and gun. And there are pictures in the media.
True. And why do you think, why is the West so good at Hollywood, man? Hollywood is all spectacle. It's all CGI, practical effect. They do all of these things. That's their forte, unfortunately. They'll take one thing, spin it around and make it seem more than it actually is. I'm not taking away. Whenever I start justifying or trying to explain Russia's rationale about the Ukraine and Russia war, I usually start with this, that explaining is not condoning. Whatever I'm trying to explain to you is not me condoning the killings of innocent Ukrainians due to this war.
Okay,
But I'll take you back a little bit. where was Ukraine centuries back? Russia and Ukraine have always been one folk. This is called the Slavic folk. So Belarusian, Ukrainian, and Russian folk have always called themselves the Slavic folks, and they've always been one people. Ukraine is very much in tune and has been connected to the Russian history. So much so that Russia's goal is only to secure the Donbass region, the Luhansk and Donetsk regions, which they proclaimed now through a declaration. They signed the declaration that they are now independent republics.
Isn't that annexation?
That is
I
that
mean, we don't
annexation?
live in, we're over from the colonization era.
Let me explain.
You're saying that's not annexation of Donetsk and Luhansk.
I will explain it to you by giving you the breakdown of
Are you saying
historical
that was the rightful annexation?
I'm not saying anything right now. Let me get to it. I'll answer your question at the end.
Okay.
So Ukraine, historically, very important to Russia, right?
Yeah.
We can't deny that. There are letters and archives available online. You can just Google it. Lenin is the person who, at the time of when the Romanov monarchy fell and the provisional Nicholas II came in place, the monarchy was not favored. Rasputin, with the voodoo magic going on in the background, talking in the ears of the monarch, the people lost faith in them. Okay, so there was Nicholas II came in. He secured the government. They took over. The people were still not satisfied because the way the First World War was handled, people were ill-equipped. There was famine. There was extortionate amount of taxes being put on Russian people. They were fed up of that stuff, and they couldn't stand it any longer. So what they did was the Bolshevik Party came to power through the political theorizations and
came the Bolshevik Revolution
and Lenin,
which you also call the
Red
Revolution, I think. Yeah,
the Red Revolution. So they came in, they overthrew the provisional government, and they came into power. Then there was a civil war between them as well. There was the Red Army and the White Army. The White Army, the remnants of the monarch, of the Russian Tsars, they fought amongst each other, and then the Red Army won. But my point is, Lenin was at the forefront of the communist ideology. Lenin, what he did was at the time, in order to bring Slavic folk together, the working class, the people who are at the brunt of the pitchforks, who are gnawing their and grinding their bones in the mines, he wanted to bring those people together. So communism was a product of its time. It was, I will not comment whether it was a successful thing or not. China is doing really well. Soviet Union's collapse taught China that communism coupled with capitalism can make you a superpower in the next 5 years, as of today. But my point is that Lenin was the person who wanted to bring Slavic folk together. What he did was he literally gifted Donetsk, Luhansk, Odessa, Kharkov, 7 regions. He gifted it to Ukraine, so that to bring in the connectivity between Russia and Ukraine, because they were so dissolate from each other. There was so much gap. Russia is really huge, man. So because of that, the connectivity, they wanted to unite people. Then later on, after the Second World War, after Stalin, there was another president. I'm forgetting his name, but he was the one in 1958-ish. He literally gifted Crimea to Ukraine. Imagine this. So, is that annexation? Okay, let's talk about Donetsk and Luhansk. There was more parliamentary documentation done through the Russian government where they were able to pass on those regions to Ukraine. Crimea was that one last missing piece of the puzzle to bring that region in connection with the greater Soviet Union at that time. So Crimea was literally gifted without any ratifications involved. There's no document that says that Ukraine owns Crimea.
Are you saying that gives the right to Russia to take those regions back?
I don't think so.
Because that's what's happening right now.
Listen to this. Abhi, recently, the way in the West, who's the watchdog of the West? Who's that supreme leader that everyone goes to when they're in trouble?
USA.
Exactly. So in the same vein, Russia feels like it is also that for the East. अभी recently Uzbekistan और Armenia के बीच में there was, nobody knows about this, nobody talks about it because it's more to do with the eastern side of the politics and the geopolitics. There was a standoff. There was literally, they were going to war against each other. Russia came in, brokered peace. So it feels as if it's entitled to watch over these countries in the east. Ukraine की जो बात है, Ukraine, what was the Cuban Missile Crisis? Cuban Missile Crisis was a big thing that was the culmination of the Cold War. And
Russia had planted missiles at the border of US, and that,
exactly.
that.
Not the border. Cuba is really close to US.
Yeah, they're neighbors.
Very close, and
they established bases in.
So
Cuba.
Imagine tomorrow Russia.
USA did not like that. Yeah.
Yeah, nobody liked that in the West. So if Russia goes into Mexico tomorrow and establishes a military base there with ballistic missiles 24/7 pointing at America.
They're not going to like it.
They will lose their shit, man. So imagine that since 1991, Soviet Union collapsed, right? So the communist threat subverted. NATO's goal was to subvert the communist threat.
Yeah.
That was always the case. After the Soviet Union collapsed, what was the point of NATO? Why does it exist now? What's the boogeyman that they're
fighting terrorism.
They're fighting terrorism, but I don't think so. I feel like so in 1991 when I think NATO has had enough members at that time for it to sustain a military complex enough to make sure that no terrorism happens in Europe or in the West. What Russia urged, actually, it was a condition for the Soviet Union's collapse. It was caused through a lot of other factors as well, but once it collapsed, I don't want to say collapsed, I want to say disbanded, because they realized that communism does not work anymore. Imagine like making 1,000 coats per year, grey coats, nobody bought them. So it was wastage of time, resources. Working class was superior than, let's say us, we're lawyers, right? So a lawyer was considered to be lesser of, manual labor was more
that's important. The communist ideology.
Exactly. So
it's not, that's the thing, it's not practical. That's why
it's not practical. That's why it
didn't work out
disbanded.
for
And they
Union.
Exactly, and they disbanded willingly. The Communist Party sat down together on that fateful night and they decided that this doesn't work anymore. We should do away with it. And
I think they were held against the wall as well.
I would
give the West a little credit.
No, I will give the West a little credit as well. You bring up, usually when we have conversations about Russia, you bring up Afghanistan a lot. We can talk about that in a bit as well. Afghanistan is a playground, a proxy playground for US to do its bidding and then cause all sorts of havoc with Russia. But I can also argue that Russia did the same thing in Vietnam. In Vietnam, the Viet Congs, they armed them. How did America do? Did it do well in Vietnam?
They didn't do well.
I don't want to do. I don't want to compare as a yardstick. Compare dicks with Russia and US. I don't want to do that. But I'm just saying that there were a lot of factors involved. Running a huge country like that is not an easy task. So when the Soviet Union was disbanded. And Putin came in power later on, Yeltsin, after Yeltsin. Yeltsin was a drunk. He didn't care for the life of him. He didn't care about anything else. Putin, when he came in, he tried to meddle with the West. He wanted to vibe with them, man. He wanted to become friends with them. All they urged from the beginning was don't expand. Okay, you want to keep NATO? How about we become members? That was always declined.
That was the proposal as well?
Yeah,
from Putin's side?
It was proposed. Keep us in NATO. Like, how about we become members as well? But they don't have anyone else to fight against, right? So that's why they didn't take them over there. Then there were like verbal and I believe there were written agreements between Russia and US and the West as well, where they literally promised Russia that they will not expand beyond the members that stood at 1991. After that, they didn't
stand true to that promise. They kept on expanding.
5 NATO expansions towards the east, incrementally, like coming closer and closer to Russia's borders. Russia, that's why when you said, going back to what you said earlier on how Russia, and actually I said that Russia has been very, very sheltered. It's because it was pushed away. It was that kid. Have you seen Tropic Thunder? Matthew
I
McConaughey says that to Tug Speedman, the character who Ben Stiller plays as. He's an action star, right? So he's a failed action star, and he's done hits with Scorcher, like movies. Like he's like a metaphor for Arnold and Sylvester Stallone, Rocky movies. Like action hero, no drama, acting skills involved, just popcorn action, and he used to be the face of it. So and he's been having a failed career, and Matthew McConaughey says to him, he's his agent. So he's like, I know you're that kid on the playground who has fleas and nobody else wants to play with you, but you need to like shave your head and get on the monkey bars, man. So that's exactly what happened with Russia. Russia tried. They were always looked at as the kid on the playground. They tried to shave their head, disband Soviet Union, and they were never welcomed in that circle of the West. So since then there have been 5 NATO expansions, and then to top that, the culmination, it did not start just on February 2022. It didn't begin then. This conflict was brewing since 1991. Russia was talking about the Donbass region. Sorry, I'm cutting you on that, but the Donbass region has been destabilized like for a very long time. Since 2014, like there are records of Obama spending a lot of billions of dollars to and they gave money to propagate to different groups in Ukraine. The Azov battalion that I'm talking to you about.
So what I'm trying to understand,
they're neo-Nazis, man.
So what I'm trying to understand is, wait a second, you called Azov battalion, you called them out as neo-Nazis, and Zelensky, he was born to a Jewish family. That's actually, ironical. You calling out a Jewish person as neo-Nazi, isn't that?
I see the hypocrisy.
He wouldn't like it.
Yeah, he wouldn't like it. The West wouldn't like it. He's their favorite nowadays. But I just wanted to take a few steps back and explain to you that since 1991, 5 NATO expansions, Soviet Union disbanded. They urged not to expand towards the east. Ukraine, since 2011-ish, has been like, nobody considers, this is an open secret. You can search up online and see how the Obama administration was in cahoots with the and causing all sorts of anti-Russian sentiments were widespread across Ukraine. It was all funded by the Obama administration. Now the Obama administration, what they did was they ousted the legitimate president of Ukraine at that time. I forget his name, but I know the guy's name who supplanted him later on. His name was Poroshenko. His last name is Poroshenko.
Poroshenko, yes.
So Poroshenko was a complete tool of the US government. What he did was, when he came in, it was, at that time, there was a huge debate going on in Ukraine whether they should join in with the European Union and also NATO.
NATO, yes.
So that created a lot of animosity from the Russian side as well. They always considered Ukraine to be a very intrinsic neighbor and a very trusted ally to the Russian government and the Russian.
That's actually like reproducing Cuban Missile Crisis in Ukraine by adding Ukraine in NATO.
You know what was happening since 2012? What happened was that the anti-Russian sentiment went widespread across Ukraine. People who spoke Russian were discriminated against. They were killed. They were indiscriminately shot, arrested. They were ousted from their homes. Their homes were burned down. All of them were pushed towards the eastern side of Ukraine, where Crimea and Donbass region lies now.
That's the plight of the people residing in Donbass region, because I believe Donbass region is densely populated with Russian-speaking people.
Exactly.
They're being very, they've been discriminated against, and
Exactly. Like they were not only like just discrimination on the ground. There were de jure discrimination as well happening, like legally. Legally, they banned all
legally,
history.
systematically, how?
through the reform in the government, like Poroshenko came in, he banned Russian as the language to be spoken in Ukraine was the national language now. Russian language was not even an option anymore in the schools. Whoever spoke in Russian was discriminated against. People were ousted from their homes. They were burned. Their homes were burned. People inside the homes were burned by all through this militia group called the Azov Battalion, which are literal neo-Nazis. The Azov Battalion is a real thing. Nobody talks about it. In the West, they never utter a word about them. They don't say anything about what they do, what they've been doing, and they're going to do. And they've been harassing the Donbass region since 2012. There are 2 Minsk agreements that were signed between Russia and Ukraine. One of those conditions was that you will not discriminate against Russian-speaking populace. You will not do all of those things which are anti-Russian. You will not harass these people anymore. These conditions were set there. You will not join NATO. You will not, and Ukraine agreed on those things. But then it all came to a flashpoint in 2014 when Poroshenko came in. Russia had to go in and secure the rights of Russian people and Russian-speaking people in Crimea.
Just because Azov Battalion went against them just because they had Russian descent.
Exactly.
That's like a very, that's an ingredient of genocide.
Exactly. Like Azov Battalion, I'll tell you who they are. They're not native Ukrainians only. They are those people who used to be fascist. They were inclined towards. They were very sentimental towards the fascist cause. In the Second World War, the First World War, these are that group of people who were considered cowards by the Russians, who deserted their men and they turned against Russia itself. So these are those people, the remnants of those people. This group still existed in Ukraine. They gained traction by numerous funds from the West, and they started harassing these people there, and they were pushed to the brink of Crimea. And Crimea, as I told you, there is no legal document to state that Ukraine owns that piece of land. The Crimean authorities reached out to Russia. Russia went in. They did a referendum. They monitored the referendum. Yeah, you can. That's also debatable, and people make fun of it that it was not true referendum. 95% of the people voted to join Russia, and that's what referendums, plebiscites do. People vote on it, and they just leave their previous the territory they're attached to. We call it secession, and we don't call it annexation. That's coming back to you. It's not annexation when there's no document to suggest that Crimea is part of Ukraine. There's people validly voted through a referendum. 95% or more probably voted overwhelmingly to join Russia, and that's what happened. And Russia just was there to facilitate that move. Russia, a lot of Crimea consists of a lot of museums dedicated to the World War, the Second World War and the First World War, the heroic acts of many lieutenants, marshals, and generals who perished in that at that time. So Crimea has always been undisputedly a very much in part of Russia. As I told you before, it was literally gifted to Ukraine through a verbal, on just a shake of a man-to-man handshake. It was given to them to facilitate that connectivity between these two regions, like Russia and Ukraine.
But it didn't work out really well.
It didn't work out very, very well because Ukraine it doesn't have a legitimate government since 2014, and nobody talks about this stuff. So the thing is that since then, the Minsk agreements, though, they were violated. Anyone can search up those documents and see that those Minsk agreements were the premise for the peace between Russia and Ukraine. Before that, Russia reached out to the West as well numerous times that let's sit down and talk about Ukraine. Why are you guys in approaching towards the east? Why are you approaching our borders? They were in Kiev. There's a military complex, a facility established which dedicates itself 24/7 to point their ballistic missiles towards Russia. Why are they pointing towards Russia? Isn't that an act of aggression?
That's an act of aggression.
Exactly. So there have been a lot of things that the West, I think they did not anticipate Russia to do what they did by invading Ukraine. Their goal was always and always still is to secure the rights of the people in Donbass, in Luhansk and Donetsk. These two
I think
regions
that
have faced a lot of killings and devastation.
I think all of these plans kind of backfired as well, because economy globally has been in shambles since this Russo-Ukrainian conflict came into being. I mean, oil prices
exactly
skyrocketing. There's also a joke which Vladimir Putin, he was telling a joke where I think it's about German family where German parents are telling their kids, we have to we'll win the war against Russia, and Russians are bad people. We can't let them win. And then Vladimir Putin says, when war broke out, and what they face is what German families are facing is there's now they have winter. Ab winter mein kya ho raha hai कि they don't have oil. They need oil in winter especially, or they're facing the cold now. And this German parents, they're telling their kid, we have to put Russian people in miserable condition because they're bad people. And the kid is like, are we Russian people? The parents are like, no. Like, because we're in misery right now because we need oil and we're facing the cold. So I think their plans kind of, I won't say it was Western plans, or like, I won't say that, but if these were Western plans, they kind of backfired as well, because it's in front of us all.
I believe so. And going back to your question about Zelensky and how media portrays Russia, they portray Russia on a daily basis. Oh, Russia's economy is going in shambles. Russia is outmatched in Ukraine. Ukraine is not, like, Ukrainian forces are gone, like, from the region. Like, as of battalion, they're trying their best, and Ukrainians are doing their best.
That's funny how you said, they're gone. They're just done.
What I'm trying to get at, I know I said it in a very stupid way, but what I'm trying to say is that right now Russia in the Donbass region, the fighting that is going on over there, it's not just Russia versus Ukraine anymore. And everyone was like, Russia, it's supposed to be a superpower. It's supposed to just
Biden administration has come out openly, like they're saying openly, okay, we're going to fund and support Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Yeah, and Biden is the only one right now.
And if you condemn them, you get cancelled.
Exactly. Like Biden right now is the only proponent. Democrats in America, they've always been warmongers, man.
Democrats, yes, definitely.
They've always stooped. I think Trump was way better than all of those people.
You believe so? I believe so too.
He brokered a peace deal with North Korea, and now it's going to shambles again. Kim Jong-un is not as warmed up to the West right now as it was when the Trump administration was in power.
Because it was Republicans back then, and now it's Democrats.
Exactly, like
in power.
Republicans have their own flaws, but Trump was a good businessman and a good mediator between countries as well. Putin never did. On his watch, Ukraine and Russia war never broke out. It all happened under the guise of these other people that came in, Biden. But I'm just trying to get at that the media portrays Russia in a very bad light, despite the fact that the Russia's foreign reserves, 300 billion, were seized by the West as a punishment for invading Ukraine.
They're still functioning fine.
There's no precedent. They're still functioning fine. The World Bank has now stated, like, I think they came out with a report that 2.2% the economy is gonna rise and is gonna grow in the next year by 2.2%. So they're doing really well.
They're doing fine. They're
doing fine. It's the West that's throwing in money at Ukraine and prolonging the suffering of the Ukrainian people by making this war more devastating than it actually is. It actually should have been. And again, like, Russia established these under international humanitarian law, these safe passages towards Ukraine. My city, where I was born, in Rostov-on-Don, it sheltered so many refugees from Ukraine. They welcomed them with open arms. They provided them shelter, and that's what the Russian-speaking Ukrainians did at the first thing when the war broke out, they went to Russia. They knew that they would be welcomed there. They would not be discriminated against. They found shelter and refuge in Russia. So Russia has been very much following international law and precedent set by numerous Western countries. You know that the territorial principle and the principle of sovereignty is paramount under international law. International law is not really hard law, which is in our domestic legislations where if a person commits a crime, you get sentenced. There's a police involved. A police which has
international law doesn't
purpose.
Work that way.
Exactly. So there's no police. So it's all parked on the onus of the states and their willingness to actually adhere to the doctrines and the provisions of international law. So everyone interprets international law differently. For instance, Russia, their justification, international law justifications to invade Ukraine, apart from the geopolitics and the history and the proxy Cold War that is going on between Russia and UK. The reasons are, number one, the R2P principle. It's a very new doctrine.
Responsibility to protect.
Exactly. It was ratified in the UN General Assembly in 2005 in the World Summit. It's the most highly ratified UN General Assembly resolution ever. And it is premised on this like so. It states that there are 3 pillars of action that countries must undertake in order to ensure peace and security of the world. Number 1, call out people when they commit atrocity crimes like ethnic cleansing, war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity. All of these atrocity crimes, they're the most heinous crimes ever, because they take lives of people on a large mass scale. So whenever those crimes happen, the countries have an erga omnes obligation to make sure that they make other countries adhere to the international understanding of the fact that these atrocity crimes will never be tolerated by anyone ever. So Russia uses the R2P principle they used it in Ukraine. The same way the US has been doing that because of ISIS in Syria, like drone attacks happening way across borders without any permission, and in Afghanistan as well. So, and it's premised on this, and it's very interesting. Like there's a resolution on Declaration on Friendly Relations Between Nations called Resolution 2627. It is deemed to enshrine and solidify the territorial principle and the sovereignty principle of countries over its subjects or people. Subjects, not a very good term, people. So, as human rights developed with time, the resolution basically, I'll just paraphrase, don't quote me on this, but it essentially says that a nation is sovereign over its peoples if it provides for it human rights, meaningful avenues of governance, and allows them to self-realize through the process of self-determination, to choose their own path and destinies within the confines of a territory.
So now, you're saying
reverse engineering of this, scholars have taken to interpret that to mean that if you don't provide meaningful governance, if you don't provide human rights to your people, you don't provide them the avenues for legitimate self-determination, then you're not a sovereign over that country.
So that is the argument that Russia uses,
exactly.
Because the government of Ukraine has failed in order to protect
the Russian people.
Ukrainian people with Russian descent, and Russia is now using the responsibility to protect principle to, invade and then, get those discriminated
I don't want to
people.
call, there was the big bias and like a clash between the terminologies being used. The West used it as Russia invading Ukraine. Russia always argued that this is a
humanitarian intervention.
It's a military operation.
They always called it military operation.
The potato. It's the same thing essentially. But the fact of the matter is that Russia's perception is such that it wants to secure the people who have been so on a mass scale have been murdered, killed, Their human rights were not given to them. They had no say in the government. They were indiscriminately killed and tortured. All of those things, and that's why they went in and did whatever they did, and they're still doing that. Another thing is that under international law, the UN Charter prohibits the use of force under Article 2.4. It's an outright prohibition in all senses of the word, with two exceptions. Two exceptions are such. Article 51 says that everyone has an inherent right to collective or individual self-defense. And this is a customary international law doctrine as well, like it comes from there as well. But the UN Charter does not permit anything beyond the rule that the attack must have occurred for you to be able to invade or to respond back to something that any border skirmishes that happen between two countries. So that's also a topic of what do we mean by attack? What do we mean by collective or individual self-defense? Proportionality ki baat
and then we delve into the definition of international armed conflict, so on and so forth.
Exactly. But what Russia has been doing with Ukraine is that it has adopted the Bush Doctrine in Iraq. The Bush Doctrine was such. The UN Charter says the armed attack must have occurred. There have been a long gap between the 9/11 attacks and what Bush and the Bush administration did in Iraq. Went in for Saddam Hussein, to capture Saddam Hussein because they were...
And to get rid of weapons of mass destruction, which were never found.
So they use that doctrine of anticipatory and preemptive self-defense before the threat
in
grows
Ukraine.
In Iraq. That's what Bush did.
No, Russia did that in Ukraine.
Exactly. Yeah. There was a brewing threat for them. They perceived the ballistic missiles always facing them as a threat. And the fact that there were rumors and there were legitimate talks going on that for Ukraine to join NATO, to join the EU, drifting away from what the Minsk agreements actually essentially said. So Russia has used that, which the Obama administration, Trump used this rule as well, of preemptive and anticipatory self-defense. Numerous times, Trump also ordered the bombing of key points in Syria where ISIS was brewing apparently biological weapons. So this was done on the guise of this. Even France has adopted this stance as well. But in addition to this, they also are in favor of this new doctrine called the unwilling and unable test. They use this test all the time. US practices this, France practices this. And
now
I think Russia is adopting
this
it as well because they see the hypocrisy of everyone and how they are dealing with things. So they, in order to promote their interests as well now and to secure their borders, they're using these international law justifications. The unwilling and unable test is basically premised on this fact. So if there is a terrorist threat, Azov battalion for Russia in Ukraine, which is a neo-Nazi group who is torturing, killing on the masses, the Russian people. By the way, all of these things you can check on Telegram. Telegram is a Russian-based app, and you can see all of these videos. The Western media will not show you those things, but you can see them on Telegram because it's unrestrained, it's uncensored. So you can get access to these videos, and they're horrific videos, by the way. So if you're squeamish, don't do that. But what I'm trying to essentially get at is the unwilling and unable test is premised on these factors. Number one, they see whether if there is a terrorist organization which is functioning from a territory of a country, the people who the countries or the states which perceive that as a threat on a global scale, what they do is they apply this test on the heads of state, the de jure and the de facto legitimate government of that state. So what they do is they apply it there. The unwillingness is defined as such that, for example, if you give an ultimatum through negotiation, mediation, international mediation, negotiation, you ask a country to stop or use its military force or police to subvert the growing threat within their own country.
If they don't do it, then you have the right to intervene.
Exactly. They give them the time span of कि इस दौरान ये सब कर लो. Do use your own means to dispel the threat. And if they're not doing that, then that means they're unwilling to do that.
Also, everything.
And sometimes countries which are third world countries, they're not well equipped to deal with such threats as well. So they're unable as well sometimes. They don't have the military complex installed to deal with such threats. So what Russia did was it gave an ultimatum.
So Russia gave Ukraine the ultimatum to dispel whatever Russia saw as a threat. Russia didn't see the intent in Ukrainian government to dispel whatever they saw as a threat. And then Russia found that as a valid and reasonable, cause to intervene.
Exactly.
And apart from all of this debate, I also think when it comes to war, when it comes to battle, it's not really easy to beat up Russia. I mean, if you see them historically, they're battle-hardened people. I mean, who helped West win the World War II?
I think
it was Russia. Russian army was the first. I think it was the first army to be able to, successfully enter Germany and defeat them. It was actually what caused Hitler to commit suicide. Isn't that the case? Stalin was leading the Russian army, right? And
exactly.
Stalin also, people also call him out as a mass murderer, which he also there's blood of a lot of people on his hands, but he's also known as a man of principle. I remember Man of Steel and Man of Principle. I remember you once told me a story where his son was captured by German soldiers. What was that story?
So Russia has the people of Russia, they don't see, the West might see Stalin as this full-on evil guy, but Russia doesn't see him like that. It's very hard to navigate. He's a very complex and flawed, evil, good man. It's a very weird description, and I'll tell you why. Because Stalin's ruthlessness and his evil was balanced. It was just
that story of his son getting captured.
Exactly. Stalin is the reason why Russia was able to win the Second World War. It was able to repel the Germans from their land. And I'll tell you how that is.
Do tell me more about that story as well, where his son got captured and
So Stalin,
he had to make a choice.
Stalin basically had a son. His name was Yakov Zigushvili. I don't remember his last name, but Yakov was his son, and his son was a lieutenant in the Second World War, and he was on the ground fighting in the trenches with common lieutenants during the war. So he was captured by the Nazis, right? So when he was captured, he was put in those concentration camps, and Adolf Hitler literally reached out to Stalin and wanted to broker an exchange for his marshal, which the Soviets captured, and his son, who was a lieutenant for the Russian army. So what Stalin did was he refused to trade. He literally sacrificed his own son.
Because you can't make a comparison of a lieutenant and a general.
That's exactly what he said. He was like, you can't make a
comparison. He
sacrificed
his own son. Because of principle.
Because of that principle. So it wasn't such that only loyalists to Stalin were favored. He was ruthless to everyone. That's
why I say that, Russian soldiers are historically battle-hardened soldiers. Also, Russia is a huge country. You can't, practically conquer that. Not that we're in that era of colonization, but it's very difficult. And yes, the winter
is so
Napoleon faced his first defeat in Russia because of the winter.
Exactly. So Stalingrad was the biggest shift in the war between Russia and Germany. Stalingrad had the most fiercest, longest battle, and that was the culmination of Russia being able to get that moral high ground and defeat the Germans in battle to sway the odds in their own favor.
I think we should give a little credit to Alan Turing as well.
Yeah, we can for sure give him credit, but then I can also say that towards the end of Hitler's life, most of his generals were were not very much in tune with Hitler anymore. Hitler was going crazy at the end. He was a cocaine freak. He
was a cocaine freak?
Yeah, he was a drug addict. He was a cocaine freak. He was going nuts, man, with power and all of those things. Sometimes power does that to you, man.
Yeah, absolute power corrupts you absolutely. That's
exactly. And he had the world in his hands.
He was winning everywhere, literally.
But then, like, his lieutenants and his generals, they ousted a lot of information to the West and Russia as well. They were easily bought as well at the end. So Alan Turing deciphering ciphers between the Nazi platoons and coordinating their attacks on everyone. He was able to decipher that information and tell and to the rest of the world of
what target is next.
Exactly what the plans were. So I can argue that as well, that maybe Hitler just lost it at the end, and he couldn't handle the pressure that he put himself in. That big proclamation to conquer the whole world and rearrange it in his own image.
But then that steals credit from Russia as well.
Yeah, it steals credit from Russia as well. But I think Russia did the most fiercest fighting. 25 million people died. Everyone talks about the Holocaust, and I don't discount that for a second. That was the most heinous, atrocious thing that ever happened in the history, in the books. It's one for the ages.
Of course.
Nobody can dispute that. But the thing is that the Russian people sacrificed too much. That's why Ukraine and neo-Nazism there is not going to be tolerated by Russia anymore.
Because they've suffered at the hands of Nazis as well.
25 million people reduced to corpse, bones, and dust.
Vapors.
There's nothing left of them. And like, I'll just tell you this much. Like my grandfather, he fought in the war. I brought the album, by the way. I just wanted to show you in the camera. Is this the camera?
Yeah.
So that's my grandfather.
These pictures are the one on the horse?
No, the horse. That's, I think, a painting, and it was a.
The one. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and this right here. That's my grandfather. He served in the World War. That's him in the uniform, and this is literally my grandmom. As a kid, like over here, she's. Where is it? Sorry. Like, look at this. Like, she is like skinny.
You came
malnourished. They were malnourished. Like, this is the generation that saved the world, man. This is the generation.
That's
like
actually very interesting.
So like, I am very much like my mother's side of the family. Most of them, they were a huge family, and they all perished in the Second World War or the First World War. So Stalingrad's battle was the most fiercest of all. But then the time came of the winter. And that's where things swayed in Russia's favor.
Nature played in favor of Russia.
And then Stalin's resolve to make sure that the army doesn't back out. There was a presidential order passed, 229. You can search it up online as well. And you'll see it was literally called not a step back. Stalin ordered everyone who flees the battle to have severe repercussions if they were.
That's what Nazis did too, actually. Like, whoever retreated, they shot them.
They did that, and it was like a mercy thing between the soldiers as well. If I get shot and I don't want to be caught by those Nazis, I don't want to be tortured by them. Just put me out of my misery and just shoot me in the head. So these are ruthless things, I admit that, but these are the things which propel them to push.
These are the decisions which help you win a war.
Exactly. So he was a very flawed man. He was a very complex man, but he essentially allowed Russia to win the war, and Russia can never forget that. That's the thing. That's why we talk about him in a very neutral manner. We don't talk about him in a way where it's one-sided that he was evil. If he wasn't so ruthless and evil in all sorts of ways, I think Russia wouldn't have won the war.
It's actually kind of very nice to have you here and get to know a different picture about Russia, because, going back to the start, when it comes to Western media, they have like movies about Russia, portraying Russia as, an evil place. And also it happens, for example, movies mein Mexico jab aata hai, the picture goes yellow.
Yeah.
Do you notice that? Russia Russia is all about cold, vodka, and assassins.
Yeah, assassins, hitmen are all Russians.
Yeah.
So why is that?
Yeah.
Isn't there a little bias there? Don't you sense it a little bit?
I see that as a propaganda.
Like, just going.
There are games like games.
Yeah. We've played Call of Duty and all
Call
of
of
those
Duty,
things.
Yeah.
We've seen all of that.
Metal Gear.
Yeah. So I'm just, just to add to the heroic acts of Russians during the Second World War, I'll just go back to Leningrad, the siege of Leningrad, which is modern day St. Petersburg. Leningrad was
I've
under
heard it's a
siege.
beautiful place.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful place, and it's called the city which is built under the corpses of people. Leningrad siege was a 900 days siege, which lasted for 900 days.
900 days.
2.5 million people trapped, albeit like 500,000 people evacuated before the war, so 2 million people trapped in a city. And the Nazis surrounded them, and they bombarded them with 7,500 bombs, incendiary bombs and bombings from the top, like through air strikes and stuff like that. Leningrad was relentless in its resolve that this war will end and we need to last. There was cannibalism happening inside the city. There was a famine. There was no food. All the food supplies were gone. People ate rats, their own pets. All of those things were happening at that time in that city. Like imagine a people just closed off from the rest of the world, but they still had that hope that they will survive this brutal siege. To the point where my mom used to tell me that her grandfather used to say this to her as well, that there was a stockpile of grains and seeds in one of those in their storage rooms in the city. So those seeds were not touched. Even one seed was not touched because they believed that the war will end and then they'll sow those seeds and grow their crops and continue living on. So that's their resolve.
That's their resolve. That's their conviction. They knew that they're going to win.
Exactly. And the reason
That's
why
how
the
you win.
Germans wanted to target Leningrad is because it had 600 factories, industrial factories, and the most industrial output was coming from them, second to Moscow. So it was a very strategic place to capture. Plus the Baltic fleet, it was a home base for the Baltic fleet of Russia as well. So that's why the Germans tried their best to do. I also recall, and it's actually true, that there was a composer, a very famous Russian composer called Dmitry Shostakovich. I think it's Dmitry Shostakovich, sorry. Dmitry Shostakovich is a very famous Russian composer. My friend in Glasgow, he used to study at the Royal Conservatory of Scotland. It's the biggest film school in the world, one of the biggest film schools. He was a violinist. He was studying violin in that university, and they taught all of these compositions to them. So Dmitry was the one who wrote the Seven Symphonies, the infamous Seven Symphonies. It's the most hard.
I didn't know that.
It takes a lot of skill. It's an 80-minute long symphony. It's called the Seven Symphonies. It was invented in the early days. He wrote that and he composed it in the early days of the siege. It was first played for the first time ever to the audience, to the public, during the siege time, and also from then onwards, they used to play it on the loudspeakers facing the German front every month, to show that we're having a good time.
I don't know why. I don't know why it reminded me of that scene from the movie Titanic, where the violinists were playing violin while Titanic was sinking.
But this one didn't sing though. So that's the thing. Like they are very, very strong people. Like during the war, they were outmatched. They literally won with chairs and furniture. Like they sharpened the furniture, and that's how they won. They were outmatched. The German army was so militarily advanced, and their industrialization happened very fast, very rapidly. Their tanks were so advanced. They had the most modern equipment on the planet at that time. That's why they were able to raise so much hell. And Russia literally won the war with the bodies of their men. The men used to throw themselves, like there were fronts for months. The front wouldn't move either way sometimes, and these men, the young Russian soldiers, used to throw themselves at the Gatling guns, the machine guns of that era, with their bodies like blocking the guns, so that their brethren or comrades at that time would push the front back from the motherland. So these are the heroic acts that Russia did, and you can never discount that. Like this is the generation that
it's actually sad that we don't hear about these things normally.
Nobody talks about it.
Nobody
Everyone
talks
discounts
about
the role that Russia played in the
That's why
Second World War.
it was actually nice to have you here and get to know a different picture about Russia. Thank you for coming to our studio and telling us about new facts.
I'm really grateful to be here.
Thank you once again. I think we'll conclude it here.
Okay.
It was nice to have this chat with you.
You should bring me on again. I have so much stuff to tell you,
You
about.
should, yeah.
About Lenin and about Can we just add this in, just to add an argument towards? I didn't even go through Zelensky and his what's happening over there. Zelensky himself, you said that he has a very nice image in front of the world, but he's an actor. That's what he does.
Sorry to cut you off. He was a comedian, I believe.
He was a very famous actor in Russia, and then onwards he went to Ukraine, and then he became
a president.
But I'll tell you the story of how he became the president. So there is a guy, a very famous Russian oligarch called Igor Kolomoisky. You can Google his name and he will appear on Wikipedia, and it's over there. It says so that he's the guy who owns most of the things, most of the factories factories and has a lot of investments in different businesses in Ukraine. Igor Kolomoisky is the guy who owns the company that produced that TV show, that the Many Parts TV show that Zelensky based his campaign off, the presidential campaign off, where in the show he is a teacher, a common teacher, and then eventually he gets frustrated with the governance, and then he gives a very inspirational speech in this classroom, and some kid makes a video of him, and it goes viral, and then he becomes president in the TV show. So art imitating life, life imitating art, flip it the way you want. What happened next was Zelensky ran for the presidential campaign, right? And he won through that. The presidential campaign, so Igor Kolomoisky owns the company. He funded the movie. He funded his presidential campaign. He also funds the Azov battalion, the neo-Nazis. And nobody talks about it. And the neo-Nazis, Zelensky put them in the National Guard. Where have you ever heard this in the entire world, where neo-Nazis are sitting in the parliament, in the National Guard, and that's not talked about? Oh, we need all the manpower. We need neo-Nazis to help us win wars now. So, and then have you seen recently, in the Canadian Parliament, Zelensky was invited by Justin Trudeau, and they stood up and applauded a neo-Nazi, a Nazi from the Second World War. He's a 98-year-old Yaroslav or Yugoslav Honka something name, and he was applauded with a standing ovation. Putin literally in an interview said that, doesn't the speaker of the parliament do his research? Do you guys do, or you will go far and beyond and go out of your way to make Russia feel hurt?
To make them look bad in the international arena.
Exactly. Even Zelensky's wife was face palming at that time. She was like, what the hell is going on? Why are we giving a standing ovation to this guy? So Zelensky is not, when Putin, everyone called Putin's speech before the war that we're going in and we're gonna oust the neo-Nazis and the drug addicts in the Ukrainian government. He was talking about these people. He was talking about Zelensky himself. He is also there are videos of him completely out of his mind, drugged out of his mind, partying. They're partying in Kiev.
There are videos?
They're taking money from the West and then investing it into armaments and weapons, and to use it against Russia. But they're also enjoying their time there. Nobody talks about this stuff, man. So that's the interesting part. So that's what I wanted to tell you about Zelensky and his so-called beautiful image. Right now, Biden is the only one, and the rest, Europe is now
they're backing out.
They're backing out, and they don't want to fund Zelensky anymore, and his relentlessness to burn Ukraine to the ground. That's the thing. Recently, there was a UN Security Council resolution was supposedly being passed, so that the Palestine-Israel war they wanted to broker a ceasefire between them. Do you know who vetoed that? USA. And what did UK do? They abstained. UK is I feel like UK doesn't have its own personality. They just ask They just look behind what the US wants them to do, and that's what they do. So the world is definitely biased towards Russia, and I do feel that. I don't want to propagate or say or condone the killings of the Ukrainian people. That's an unfortunate circumstance or a consequence of what happened previously. And these things people don't talk about. That's why I encourage people. Like when I teach, I teach international law, and I teach the dissertation module for Roots Ivy. It's a university, law-related university. It's a law school. So I always stress a lot about people doing good research and making sure that the research is balanced. If you have a argument, have a counter argument, and then have a muh tod jawab wala jo argument jo hota hai.
Yeah.
Like ready. If you want to make a point, if you don't have all of that, then just shut your mouth and just don't speak. I think there's more. You can give off a more intellectual vibe, and if you don't speak at all, if you don't know anything about
that's right
what you're talking about.
That's right. Thank you, Afzal. It was
Thank
nice
you so
having
much.
you.
Thank you so much.
And I'll see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.